Thank you everybody for attending our April 14 webinar. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Delia Valles and I am from Texas A&M at Kingsville, and I am with the NSF HSI STEM Resource Hub. I co-host this webinar series along with Dr. Marta Desmond from New Mexico State University. I would like to welcome you to our April 14 webinar, and today's specific topic is providing faculty with the tools for for success in a changing world. A little bit of housekeeping before we start this webinar. We have two webinar speakers today. After they have or finish their presentations, we are going to go for between 20 to 25 minutes for questions at the end of both presentations. It is important that everybody knows that we have a QA for questions specific to these presentations, but we also have the Zoom chat in case you have a question or technical question related to the whole webinar. But if you have a specific question about the content of this webinar, please use the Q&A chat room. Another thing that is important is Dr. Marta Desmond and I will be curating the questions and will be posting the questions, and reading the questions from the Q&A chat. If we don't have time to answer all of the questions during this webinar, we are going to be posting those answers in our portal. It is absolutely necessary that if you are more than welcome to become a member of our network through the HSI Hub. We are going to be posting the link to the HSI Hub in the chat room, in the Zoom chat room in a little bit for you to do that, to see that. It is extremely important that as you leave, please take 5 minutes of your time to evaluate this webinar. And you can certainly see the link of the webinar in here in blue link. It is absolutely necessary to please give us a feedback, and because this information not only provide us a feedback for these webinars, but also provide us information to submit our report to the National Science Foundation. Another important note in here as a reminder is that we are having our last webinar of the spring semester on May the 5th. We really encourage you to attend this webinar, which is oriented to the online adaptation to promote the student success. In this webinar, it is important that, first of all, that you answer again this survey, and also we invite you to become a member of this network. It is my great pleasure to introduce our two speakers this afternoon. And our first speaker will be Dr. Erik Menke, who was born in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and primarily grew up in Colorado's western slope. He received a bachelor's degree in chemistry from Colorado State University in 2000, and then moved west to join UC Irvine's second incoming class in the new chemistry and material science program. He completed his Ph.D. in 2006 under the direction of Professor Reg Penner, and then moved to UCLA as a postdoctoral researcher in the Material Science and Engineering Department at UCLA under the guidance of Dr. Bruce Dunn. He's currently an associate professor of chemistry at the University of California, Merced, having joined the UC Merced in 2008. His primary research interests are understanding the aluminum ion behavior in organic solvents, motivated by developing electrolytes for rechargeable aluminum batteries, and developing educational interventions such as culturally relevant science teaching that positively impact students' self-efficacy and sense of belonging in science courses. Our second speaker is Dr. Patricia Moriali. She is a professor and chair of the Department of Computer Science and Technology at Kean University in Union, New Jersey. Prior research on machine learning and network systems led to advances in error detection and secure processing. Later, this became a patent, and also it was commercialized. current research on human-centered computing addresses equitable software design and educational methods. She works on broadening participation and access in computer science, focus on faculty development and undergraduate research engagement. Dr. Morreale has led committees on faculty excellence in undergraduate research, mentoring the National Alliance for Women and Information Technology, as well as the Computing Research Association and the Council for Undergraduate Research. She is a past co-chair for the National Center for Women and Information Technology Academy Alliance. She is also a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement in the Sciences, AAAS, and a distinguished contributor to the IEEE Computer Society. Her leadership positions include the Computing Alliance for Hispanic Serving Institutions and the National Center for Women and Information Technologies Academy Alliance. She holds a bachelor's degree from Northwestern University and master's degree from University of Missouri and a Ph.D. from Illinois Institute of Technology all of them in computer science. We really appreciate that you took your time to be with us this afternoon, and please go ahead with your presentation and let me stop this. Just to remind everybody, we are going to be posting the link to the survey and also the link to become a member of the Hub in the Zoom link, in the chat link, in the Zoom chat. Thank you very much. And please, Dr. Menke, go ahead with the presentation. Thank you.
Okay. Is that working? Everybody can see that?
Yes,
okay, great.
It is working. Thank you.
Wait, why are you not? Oh, there we go. Too fast. Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation, for giving me the opportunity to speak here. This is going to be really interesting. I hope it's not too rough because it's going to be, well, it's going to be a little bit disjointed. I never actually really talked about this as a seminar, so this is going to be a little kind of a learning experience for me, hopefully, as well as all of you. So the HSI proposal that we wrote was titled Improving the Undergraduate Chemistry Experience at HSIs by Bridging the Gap. And we tried to be a little bit clever with GAP, where the G is for green chemistry, the A is for active learning, and then the P is peer-led experiences. So as you'll see, we did not get quite as far through this as we had hoped to, but okay, there we go. Before I talk about the actual work, though, I want to talk a little bit about kind of our motivation for writing this proposal, and so tell you a little bit about UC Merced and the students at UC Merced. As of last fall, there were 8,343 undergraduates at UC Merced, and a very broad distribution of backgrounds for students. The demographics are very unique, at least within the University of California system. The one thing that I really like to point out to kind of drive this home that really, I think, surprised a lot of people is this 8.5% of our undergraduate students identify as white. And that, well, there are a number of schools that are 50% or whatever Hispanic, but when you say this is a California UC, 8.5% of the students are white, that I think really kind of lets people know how special and how unique this school is. And I also like to point out that it was founded in 2005. Our first incoming students showed up in 2005. And so it's a really new school, and it's been growing pretty rapidly. Just to kind of give you a little bit of a picture of how rapidly it's growing. So here on the left is a picture of the campus, kind of an aerial view of the campus from my first year, from 2009. And it's not real obvious, but at the time, there were really only 3 academic buildings on the campus. This building right here, this L-shaped building, is the Science and Engineering building. All of the science and engineering faculty had labs and offices in this building. This is what we call the classroom and office building, and it's where the social science, arts, humanities faculty had their offices and where most of the classes were held. And then this was the library and administrative building here. And then there's a grassy quad, a little bit of parking, and a lot of dirt around. And then as of 2020, so this is a couple of years old, but you can see that, so this over here was the science and is the science and engineering building. This is the COB or classroom and office building, and this is the library and administrative building. All of this is our dorms. This whole section over here, though, was a grassy field and a lake 15 years ago. And now it houses most of our research labs, most of our faculty space, and a large chunk of our classroom space. And so in the last 15 years, and really as part of this 2020 project, the space on campus more than doubled. And so it's been changing pretty rapidly. It's been really fun and interesting being here and kind of being part of that. And so 4.5 years ago, 5 years ago, when we were putting this proposal together, a few of the chemistry faculty and I sat down and we were like, you know what? We're a UC, but our student body is very different than any of the other UCs. And in part, because a lot of us come from different backgrounds, it's not, we don't always know how to reach some of these students, and that's leading to things that we can see, problems that we can identify at a campus level using, very simple statistics. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to show here. If we look at student outcomes, for example, first-year retention or 6-year graduation rate, we look at all of the UCs, that's the blue dot here, and all of the UCs as a system consistently have, student first-year retention rates above 90%, 6-year graduation rates in the high 80%, very good student outcomes. But if we dig a little bit deeper across the system, the Hispanic students typically don't do quite as well as the all students category. There's about a 5% lag in both first-year retention and 6-year graduation rate. But even with that, the outcomes are still pretty high. These are really outcomes that I think any school would be proud of and would be happy with. But if you look at just UC Merced, you'll notice that for all of our students, the first-year retention rate is quite a bit lower than the system-wide first-year retention. And the 6-year graduation rate is also quite a bit lower than we want it to be as a member of the UC system. But what's particularly frustrating, or at the time was particularly frustrating and still continues to be problematic, is that despite having more than 50% of our students as Hispanic students, there's still a gap between the Hispanic student outcome and the all student outcome. And when a group is making up a majority and they're still lagging behind the average, that's very problematic. And so this was something that we were really concerned about, not just the 5 chemists who were thinking about this, but the campus as a whole has really been thinking about this problem. And so we were like, well, how do we do this? How do we, try to address this problem? And it turns out that one of the things that we noticed is that the lower division chemistry classes, in particular general chemistry and the first semester of organic chemistry, are real roadblocks to most of the students on campus. Almost every student on campus, whether they're a chemistry major or not, have to take or end up taking at least general chemistry. And we have, at the time, we had DFW rates in our lower division, in our general chemistry class, of around 35%. And so a large number of our students were having to retake general chemistry 1 or even 2, in some cases 3 times. And that gets really frustrating for students. And it makes it really hard to succeed if you're, washing out in your first semester and having to basically redo your first year 1 or 2 times. And so not knowing very much, any of us knowing very much about the state of education research or how to teach better or all of this research that's happening in education, we decided, well, we're going to brainstorm, we'll come up with some ideas. We talked to a couple of collaborators who ended up joining as co-PIs on this proposal. We decided that we would try these 3 different things. The first is to tried to develop short videos that would complement our lower division chemistry lectures. And for this, we actually had kind of two flavors of videos that we wanted to do. The first were content videos. And the idea for this is that the content videos would be very short, say 5 minutes. They would be done by a student so that the person delivering the content looked like the students who are receiving the content. And the goal was to use these and share these to make it easy for other faculty, both here or across the country, to kind of flip their classroom. And then the second set of videos that we wanted to make were more about highlighting success stories for students who had made it through chemistry, or what you can do with science as a major once you graduate with it, as a way to kind of positively impact the affect of students and make them see what other students, or help them visualize what other students are doing once they get through chemistry, and kind of help motivate them beyond it just being this abstract thing that they have to do for their major. The second thing that we wanted to do was to redesign our labs, to the lower division labs, in particular general and organic chemistry, to move away from just technique and practicing the technique in the lab, and move away from cookbook experiments to more impactful or more relevant applications and concepts. And so that's where the green chemistry aspect of this came in. And then the third aim of our project was to develop a peer-led team learning structure, both for discussion sections and the chemistry center. And so in the first year we did this, before we actually started doing anything else, before we started trying to make videos, before we started trying to figure out how to do green labs, before we did just about anything, we wanted to just get some baseline data that was a little bit broader than campus level statistics, just so that we would see if things were changing or not. So one of the first things we did was worked with an on-campus office called Saddle, which is Students Assessing Teaching and Learning, and have them observe the classrooms that we're teaching and try and figure out what the faculty are doing when they're teaching classes and what the students are doing. And to do this, we used a pretty common protocol called COPUS, which is used often in STEM classes to kind of identify what people are doing in classrooms. What we found is that the faculty spend the vast majority of time basically talking at the students, and the students spend the vast majority of time just basically sitting there passively and listening. And we also started, we had just developed or created something that we called a Chem Center, which was a place for students to come, basically an tutoring / office hour location, a centralized location. We just wanted to start measuring how many students were coming to visit, identify when it's popular, when people, when should we staff it? Is it being used? How many people are using it? In part, so that as we start to promote it, we can try to identify, changes in usage. And then we also started to try to measure performance of students. And to do that, we started using, so the American Chemical Society, for those of you that don't know, develops and creates a series of standardized exams. These are multiple choice exams. They do it for all of the different subdisciplines of chemistry. And so we started using these as final exams in general chemistry and organic chemistry, just to see how are students doing relative to students across the country. What we found is that on average, the students were doing just fine. The median scores, the mean scores were about 50%. On average, the students were essentially average chemistry students, which is totally reasonable and not too far from what we expected. And then in addition, so the kind of last thing we wanted to measure was not just student performance on things like exams, but also try to start understanding how the students felt about chemistry. And so we took a survey that had been developed previously by a chemistry education researcher, I want to say at the University of New Hampshire, and then modified lightly by, or modified fairly heavily by another chemistry researcher in Florida. And then modify that and see if that worked, how well that worked for measuring student attitude at chemistry. And so, at UC Merced, both at the start of the semester and at the end of the semester, just to see if the way we teach class is positively influencing or negatively impacting attitude with respect to a variety of different fields in science. In particular, we were interested in chemistry, obviously, but also whether taking chemistry classes impacted how students felt about biology, or whether it impacted how they felt about math. And for the first year, the first couple of years we did this, mostly what we're trying to do is really trying to just make sure that this survey worked for our population. But we did see some minor differences. For example, you can see here for intellectual accessibility, whether or not the students feel engaged in the questions of science. Very little change with respect to chemistry or biology or math. Was actually very surprising is these numbers, the 60, 69, and 62, those are pretty high compared to students at other places. So both coming in and leaving, the students felt at least some emotional satisfaction, some emotional connection to all of these different sciences, which was actually a little bit surprising to us. But otherwise, there's not a whole lot here that stands out or anything. It all seems very normal. They seem like, in all ways that we can tell, normal students taking chemistry. And then this happened. So our first year, the project was funded in 2018. We spent most of 2018 and 2019 basically getting ready, measuring baseline data. Started, fall of 2019 on a good foot, and then late in the semester started hearing problems of this whole new disease called COVID-19. And then in spring of 2020, it hit the country, and it was a huge change, and it threw an extreme wrench in basically everything we wanted to do, because everything we wanted to do involves us in a classroom or us in a lab or undergraduate students working with other undergraduate students. And so this switch to remote teaching just threw us for a huge loop, as I'm sure it threw everybody for a loop. And because we couldn't figure out how to move forward with this particular project, at least some of the aims we wanted to do, we kind of shifted gears a lot actually, and really wanted to understand how this switch to emergency remote teaching impacted instructors in particular, but also how did it impact students? And at about this time, one of the co-PIs on the project left UC Merced, and so he was replaced with a new faculty member in biology who has a lot of experience in education research. And so she and I worked together to kind of change our approach to understanding education and teaching chemistry at an HSI. And so in spring of 2020, we identified these two questions that we were really curious about. How does this transition to emergency remote teaching, how do instructors feel about it? And then what are the things that have helped them or made it harder to move to a remote setting? And I'm going to be fairly, superficial with a lot of this, in part because it's not a huge amount of time for me to talk about this. But this is something that I actually really enjoyed, and it really changed a lot of the ways I think about research and a lot of the future things I want to do in research. And part of that, at least for me, was that it is qualitative research. And I don't know about most of you, but I had zero experience in qualitative research or even thinking about qualitative problems prior to this research project. So the approach we took is basically to interview a bunch of faculty. We spoke with chemistry faculty, math faculty, biology faculty, physics faculty, engineering faculty, asked them a series of questions, and then a couple of graduate students and I worked to kind of distill all of these interviews down to, or to look for common threads and just distill them down into what we would consider categories and themes. And so what are the broad stroke lessons that we can take from these interviews? Excuse me. I was in a little bit of a rush, and so I ate my lunch a little bit quickly. So excuse me. And so as an example, one of the things that we found, or one of the quotes from one of the interviews, I think this was a biology professor, who told us that if I make a pre-recorded video, then it's impossible for me to track whether or not people watch it. I don't expect the students to watch it. I don't think I can teach this asynchronously. So I think that, based on my discussions, based on my thoughts, I have to do this in a different way. And so trying to understand, how he can interact with students in a synchronous manner through something like Zoom was a barrier for him. How do you talk to a group of people in this weird remote way, especially if I'm just doing it with videos and we're just doing everything through email? He couldn't figure out how to do that. So he had to figure out a way to teach his class synchronously instead of asynchronously. That was just one example. And so as we went through all of these different interviews, compared across interviews, compared themes, we came up with 3 broad themes that supported faculty. In particular, there was mental and emotional support for faculty, or I should instead say faculty instructors who spoke about this identified a variety of mental and emotional supports that helped them through this transition. The second support that broadly was identified were a variety of tools and support. For example, using Zoom, or having a group of other faculty that they can ask, oh, how do you create this video? How do you, send this material to the students? And then the third is something that we call pre-existing conditions. And this pre-existing conditions is maybe a little bit vague, a little bit broad, but it's basically those things that were already in support, in place before the switch to remote teaching happened. For example, people who already had work offices at home, that was helpful for them because it was one less thing that they had to worry about. Or those people who already had good networks of teaching faculty that they could lean on, that was another thing that would be a pre-existing condition. And then in terms of the barriers, the 3 things that broadly the faculty interviewed, that we interviewed that they identified, the first were affective issues. So those things that basically cause stress. This was a hard transition. It was very stressful for just about everybody. And a lot of people recognize that. And that was their biggest barrier, is the emotional and mental strain of this transition. The second were basically what we called structures getting in the way. And so, for example, here, the policies and procedures that the school, in some cases, had to adopt, in other cases, chose to adopt, that made it harder for people to use or to react or adjust to emergency remote teaching. For example, there were a variety of faculty who wanted to use, say, Discord to work with their students, but the campus policy wouldn't allow that. They had to instead use Microsoft Teams. And so forcing faculty to use software that they were less familiar with made it harder for them to make that transition. And then the final thing was just how much time and effort it took to do anything. A lot of people talked about how, I used to be able to just walk into the class and start talking. Now I have to spend an hour creating a video, editing the video, and hoping that this 5-minute video that I spent an hour making actually does its job. And so just the extra time everybody had to put in to get anything done was the third barrier that we identified. But what was nice about this, there were a lot of problems, as I'm sure everybody on this call knows, associated with switching to emergency remote teaching. That said, there were some benefits as well, or at least potential benefits. In particular, one of the co-PIs on the project, Michelle Leslie, prior to switching to remote teaching, had really wanted to flip her organic chemistry classroom. And she had started making moves that way. She had started developing some videos. She had kind of partly flipped her class. She had some in-class assignments and work projects, but it wasn't complete. But because of the switch to remote teaching, she was able to take a lot of the videos and classes that she had developed during the remote setting, trim them down, edit them, fix them up, so that when we came back to in-person, she had all of the tools necessary to flip her classroom. And so here I'm showing just a couple of the classrooms on campus, especially this one on the right. This is one of our newer auditoriums. You can see that it's not super ideal for teaching, at least in some ways, right? Having 300 students sit and stare at a person standing at the front of the classroom in an auditorium style is maybe not the best way to learn chemistry, but these are the tools we have. And so by trying to get the students working together, she was hoping she would be able to overcome some of these challenges for students, some of the environmental challenges that make it harder to learn things like chemistry. And as a result of that, so here on the left, I'm showing the COPUS results for Michelle prior to her flipping the class. You can see it's basically the COPUS results that are very similar to the COPUS results that I was showing earlier. The instructor is spending about half the time just talking at the students. The students are spending more than half the time just sitting there passively listening. Since that time, this is fall 2020, so this was COPUS during the emergency remote teaching, but Michelle's more recent COPUS results look very similar. You can see that the instructor here, Michelle, is spending much more time doing things other than just lecturing. She's spending a mix of time asking follow-up questions to students, posing non-clicker questions, clicker questions, walking around, talking to students. The students are still spending a fair bit of time listening, but they're also spending quite a bit of time in this case thinking, answering questions, asking questions to the instructor, and talking amongst themselves as a whole class. And so this flip from lecturing to a flipped classroom has really pushed the students to engage more actively in the material that they're trying to learn. And as a result of that, what she has found is that the DFW rate for organic chemistry has dropped from about, say, 40%, roughly 40%, to last time I was able to find data down to below 10% as a result of, at least to some degree, flipping her classroom. And then similarly, her teaching evaluations have gone up, or at least at the very least stayed the same. But what's potentially even more interesting are the attitude questions. If we look at the attitude of all of the students in lower division chemistry, pre-semester, post-semester, there's basically no change in their attitude with respect to chemistry. But if we just pull out the organic students from that group, for both intellectual accessibility and emotional satisfaction, we saw these very substantial gains in how the students feel about organic chemistry. And so at least to me, this is as interesting or as positive, or probably even more, than the improved DFW rates. And I think that there's a very strong correlation for both the increase in attitude and the improvement in student outcomes. And so just as a quick conclusion, the switch to ERT was really hard, a lot of barriers for students and instructors, also a very negative impact on our ability to carry out our grant and do the work that we had proposed. But of the things that supported faculty during the switch, most of them were either already there or were local to the faculty. And what I mean by that is networks that the faculty had built up or things that the faculty already had in place that they knew about. Very few of the institutional supports that the campus tried to put in place were noted by faculty as being helpful to them. And then finally, very much consistent with our original thinking for the grant, at least when it's done well, incorporating active learning in a classroom really helps to improve student outcomes as well as student attitude with respect to science. And then finally, this is an incomplete list. I couldn't think of all of the people who had helped over the years, but these are the people who have helped the most. So the current team on the project, Petra Kranzfelder, who's a biology professor, and then Michelle, Christine, and Hrant are all chemistry professors. We've had a few collaborators, in particular, Hillary Barron has been super fabulous and helped with a number of aspects of this project. And then Chrissy Dunham and Georgina Alcori were both graduate students here at UC Merced during the time and helped with a lot of this. And then most of the funding is from this HSI project, but we also received a little bit for a couple of summer things through UC Merced. And so I will stop there and let Patricia take over.
Thank you, Erik. That was great. So I believe my screen should be up. I hope it is. Any problems, just let me know. But I'm going to talk now about our project, which was here at Kean University, very similar, but focused on computing and some other nuanced differences that I'll get into. Erik laid out a really good template for us, so I'm taking advantage of it, and I'm going to give you a little context on Kean University. And this is taken from the context of roughly when we wrote the grant. First of all, I'm in New Jersey, a little bit different than the California environment. We obtained HSI status in 2017, so we are not majority minority, which I think is an important distinction for those of you at schools that might be similar. We are about 14,000, predominantly undergraduate, quite a few first and family. We're near Newark Airport. We're outside of New York City. So if you've ever been to either of those places, you've been pretty close by. A public, comprehensive, master's comprehensive university. So our demographics in the time that we were looking to write the proposal were that in computer science and information technology, and I take them together because the starter courses are all together.
Dr. Moriali, can I please interrupt you a little bit? Some of the attendees are saying that the slides are very small. Is there any way that you could enlarge them or make them?
Sure, let me see what I can do. Okay, let's see.
I think they look much, definitely is a little larger, definitely.
So is it getting better?
Yeah, this is better. Thank
okay,
you.
I'm very happy people spoke up. Keep speaking up, folks. No problem. Okay,
Thank
so
you.
Continuing on, and thank you. The demographics that we found were that we had a number of first-time, full-time freshmen showing up. And as you can see, approximately a third across Black, Hispanic, and white. We noticed, though, that the undergraduate enrollment by ethnicity declined off those first courses, very similar to what Erik was mentioning. And then graduates were even further declining, which was not where we wanted to be at all. So we could clearly see a departure of Hispanic students and Black students predominantly from the major. So our problem, we thought, was that the first major retention, first year to second year, was low. I mean, it's 50%. That's pretty terrible. We asked the students, why are they leaving, gently in advisement and stuff. And we heard things like, well, I'm not ready for the math. I don't like programming. We have a 3-course initial programming sequence, which is very common in computing, somewhat similar to what you might have in biology or chemistry or mathematics. And we noticed that poor performance in the first of those courses would be poor outcomes later courses, and eventually a departure from the major. We showed that 30% of our students were getting a C in CS0, And I have a shrinking classroom down here just to show you that gradually they would disappear. We just were not getting enough students through successfully. And more importantly, we weren't getting enough Hispanic students through. So the goals of our project were fundamentally to improve the number of students that completed the first 2 courses in our sequence with better than a C. We knew if they earned a C, they were not going to thrive later on. So if we could get people through with better than a C, we felt that this would increase our retention in the major and graduation. There are a few formal questions that we laid out here: successful transition in the first courses. We also wanted to support undergraduate research experiences, making sure that they had a good sense of self-identity and how they could contribute to the profession. And then we also addressed faculty development and growth mindset to see if that had anything to do with student success. And we are part of the Computing Alliance of Hispanic Serving Institutions, if you're familiar with that organization, and they have the affinity research group model that we were using. So our objectives were: start revising the courses and develop supplemental instruction, which is a national program. We were going to have students who had been successful in CS0, CS1 serve as peer mentors and run weekly sessions outside of class. We would have these students coach the other students on problem-solving techniques and strategies for thriving in CS0 and CS1. We were going to make sure every student had a computer science or IT faculty advisor, and we were going to have a handheld app. Pathway is one that we built. It's on top of the Suitable platform. I'll talk to you about that a little bit more. So the students could see their progress in the major and the various things that they need to do to be successful in college. We realized because so many students were first in their family to attend college, they may not have known the importance of attending office hours, going to things like supplemental instruction, learning about internships, preparing a resume, and some of the other activities one has to do to successfully go to grad school or get a full-time job on graduation. We wanted to reduce the grades of C in CS1 by 5. And then once we had accomplished that, we would move down another 5%. And overall, we also wanted to provide the faculty with professional development and growth mindset. So our methodology was very straightforward. We wanted to have a new student orientation, get all of the CS and IT majors together. They would get class visits in those first couple classes from some peers that, as Erik had pointed out, looked like them and had been successful and could articulate a message that the students would listen to. We would use a Cougar Pathways app on the phone. It's off the Suitable platform, and then Handshake, which is another product. Many of your campuses may have it, which makes internships and full-time positions accessible to first-time workers or professional workers. And then the faculty were going to be available to the students and promote asking questions, be very positive in their feedback to students. And we would work to encourage the uninitiated or the novice learner to make sure they felt comfortable in our classrooms. And here's an illustration of the pathway, students showing up, and then they get into the classroom. One of my students prepared this diagram. That's the reason I think the professor looks a little like Einstein or something. But we had a variety of different layers of intervention in the classroom. This would help the students have a foundation that they could then use to engage in research, and they would graduate and have a resume, which would allow them to be successful. Well, how'd the project go? As Erik has pointed out to us, our funds came in our case, in about 19. We were going to use spring of 2020 as a soft start. So we got them in, the money came in fall of 19. We hired our project manager. We hosted a growth mindset kickoff. That's the picture you see there. Jen Rosado came and spoke to actually we opened it to the whole university. She spoke about using the growth mindset in your classroom. She's done a lot of really good things. We began working on the revision of the courses. We were going to start some of our initiatives for CS0, our first intervention. And then boy, oh boy, were we going to really tear up the track fall of 20. We'd have our new student orientation. We'd have growth mindset in the classroom. But as we've heard, things didn't quite work out the way we had hoped. And I have a list here in this table of what we proposed and what we wanted and what we got and where we are now. The biggest change was really to our new student orientation. We wanted a multi-day residential on campus, but we ended up one day on Zoom, and now we've actually gone to a half day on campus, which has been fairly good. Our other interventions had to move to Zoom, and we have restored them now to in-campus, person to person. This new student orientation has been very successful. On Zoom, it was better than nothing, but we had previously not had anything that we got students together to meet each other before the term started. Often students, there's a campus-wide new student orientation, but people don't see their real peers right away. So by getting them together, we found out we could, and I'll go into some of the details, we could see that we could revise and adjust their fall schedules, confirm in person to person that their laptops work, they could get on campus Wi-Fi, they knew where everything was, we'd introduce the faculty, and it really made tremendous steps in removing anxieties and worries. The CS0, CS1 course revisions were such that the faculty developed common syllabi, worked in developing these common experiences. We had student ambassadors go into the classroom and speak to the students directly about making sure that they attended SI. And what we found now is that students who regularly attend SI for CS0 perform a letter grade higher than their peers. There's a more modest boost for CS1, and the pass rate has indeed improved that 5%, and we think we're on track for another 5% boost. So that was in the end fairly successful. We're still in process. The growth mindset faculty development was very interesting. We had faculty meetings. It's based on the work of Carol Dweck. She has some growth mindset books. There isn't a lot out there, so we found we had to prepare some of the materials. We put inspiring quotes, if you will, in the classrooms. We hung up research posters in the classrooms. We put motivating phrases on the tops of labs that we gave out to the students. Quite frankly, these were fairly simple things that we did, very high impact though. And our faculty did enjoy working with the students, and we were very surprised by what we found, and we'll share that in a minute. We did a comparative research study. Fall of 2020, we did not use growth mindset. Again, we were Zoom, we didn't have it. We didn't have the resources like everyone else. We were just trying to keep the show going forward. In spring of 21, we did use it. And the results were such that the students were very positive in their feedback. So this is some of the qualitative feedback that we got from it. The students liked the idea that we were trying to motivate them. They got the sense of the inspiration. Sometimes the instructors who had been through the growth mindset faculty development mentioned it. They thought that we were encouraging their success. What was most important to us, however, was the fact that we found that the students who received growth mindset intervention, the earlier we had the growth mindset intervention, the better they did. So the CS0 students improved now by about letter grade, even when we took out any other factors. The CS1 students improved a little bit, but not quite as dramatically. We found the young women were very responsive quickly to getting positive feedback from their instructors, positive messages on the graded work. The Hispanic women improved the most. Hispanic men also improved, but a little bit later in the semester. And overall, that was a very good intervention. So in our summary here, we would say that a major specific orientation really improved student retention. We found that the revision of the courses was helpful, and growth mindset was very important. I would encourage you to think small sometimes. Some of these changes were pretty modest, like the NSO. And please don't forget the faculty, because that often interventions focus on the classroom, but we've got to remember the faculty themselves might be another place to go. So in collaboration, Erik and I, and I have some acknowledgements here of the folks that worked with us, my co-PIs and collaborators. In preparing this, Erik and I had come up and tried to identify some of the commonalities between our projects. And we also have a few differences, but not quite as many. But I think this is the point where we want to probably go into questions and answers. And Erik can certainly join me on this part. So some of the common things we noted, we both had strong teams, we had good problems, detailed plans, we had to pivot like so many others on this call, and we had institutional change both in place and underway, and there have been publications. The difference is I didn't come up with quite as many. Maybe Erik has noticed some more as I made my presentation. He has physical lab improvement, I believe, that he manifested at his property, his school, and I had some faculty development.
Excellent. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We really appreciate your continued support of the program.